Welcome to the Coach Robb podcast. I'm your host, David Pingree. I'm going to be here to fire questions at the man, the myth, the legend, Mr. Coach Robb Beams. Thanks for having me.
Hey man, thanks for being here. Thanks for being a part of the program, and I'm super excited about this subject. This is a good one.
So today, and this is something that is going to be a little bit tough for some people to swallow or get their minds around, but it's the importance of quality rest and recovery. And here in the good old U.S. of Type A, we tend to be, if a little bit is good, then way more has to be better.
Absolutely.
And that is in terms of training and miles on the bike and miles on in the running shoes. And that's actually not the way it should be, right? We really drop the ball here with is rest and recovery.
We really do, and it's interesting because when you look and you talk to people from other countries, we do a lot of work with German athletes and guys in the UK, and it's amazing to me how much effort they put on recovery. And there's kind of like I won't say a joke, but kind of like a backhand joke that the Americans have done a great job on dialing in performance, but they do an abysmal job on the recovery side of things. So it's, for those of our listeners and followers that are more health oriented and they're exercising, it's just as applicable there. You don't need to be exercising every single day and smashing yourself. We're going to do a different show on the importance of low intensity training, but for the context of rest and recovery, what I find interesting is it is the subject I get the most resistance with. It requires no sweat equity. It requires no discomfort. It requires but yet people will fight it tooth and nail. And I tease with Michaela quite often. I'm always amazed that as human beings, we're supposed to be the smartest species. And yet, for those of our friends and followers that are into motorsports, can you imagine having a race car or motorcycle, race truck, and you don't rebuild it?
Just wide open all the time, every time you drive.
Second gear everywhere, all day, every time you go out. And then you wonder why your vehicle, the motor itself, completely implodes. Well, what is it that we're doing as a human being? We don't track intensity. That's where heart rate monitors come in. We don't look at fuel, but yet we don't think about jumping in our vehicle and driving across the country and guessing speed, gas mileage, RPMs, temperature. We look at a dashboard. When we're looking at recovery, we have a multitude of tools that are available, particularly the heart rate monitor. Not only do we look at the workload, but look at the recovery side. How much sleep are you getting? Quality and quantity side, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little. But it's just amazing to me that this subject is the one I get the most pushback on.
Well, we have a lot of mantras in the world of athletics, but even people who are just, health and fitness, generally speaking, no pain, no gain, I'll rest when I die. It's like we've been just programmed that unless it is painful and you're on the brink of falling out,
Yep.
you're not improving yourself.
That's exactly
and it
right.
couldn't be further from the truth. There's a time and place for high intensity, but there's a time and place for low intensity and literally laying on your couch, right?
Yes.
So, talk a little bit about that.
Well, along that thread of thought, what I find is interesting is if we're looking at, and for the sake of all of our shows, I want to make sure that we talk general fitness on one end of the spectrum and we go to the other end on the performance, high-end performance. What I find is interesting is when you look at somebody who overcooks themselves on an easy day, could be just a general fitness person that's doing some walking, but they walk a little faster than they should, walk a little longer than they should. Then when it comes a day where we want to get some quality, we want to walk them through some rolling hills or put them on a treadmill and make it a little bit more difficult, they're so tired from the easy day that they're not ready for the quality day. So it's math 101. Plus 1 minus 1 is what? 0. So what's the net gain at the end of the week? If you go to the other end of the spectrum, if I've got an athlete that I'm trying to get some anaerobic threshold or some high-end speed quality work, well, they go too hard on their easy days, leaves them fatigued for the quality days. What's the net gain at the end of the week? 0, or worst case scenario, it goes backwards. When you think about the idea, and I always want to draw this equation, think about a teeter-totter, and we'll use this illustration in almost every subject that we talk about. When you think about the teeter-totter, it's all about balance. So when we're looking at rest, what is it that we're trying to offset? The work that you've done. Well, how much work have you done? And I almost want you to think about it in sizes of boxes. The more work you do, the more rest you need. But we think that that's you being lazy or not being determined or you're not dedicated, all that negative chatter. That's what we have to break this vicious cycle. And it doesn't matter what sport we're involved in. This is not a global conversation about the Americans versus somebody else, but it's an amazing mindset that we run into. We do not embrace rest the way that the Germans and some of these performance programs, they're second to none, but they are just as dialed on rest and recovery as they are on the workload.
Yeah, and that's why, at the opening of the show, I said it's not just exclusive to the U.S., but it seems to be a mentality we have here.
Yes.
That is problematic.
Yes.
That a lot of other countries have figured out. What is quality rest and recovery, and how much do we need, and how do you tell that?
Yeah. This is a subject that I get a lot of people laugh at me like I'm an idiot because they think I live in a glass house. Ideally, you need at least 8 hours of sleep. And I know for a lot of us that's not realistic. With yourself being in the fire department, you're on call. I'm just saying, if you're looking at a 10,000 foot view, our goal is 8 hours of sleep. But we always look at sleep in a QQ coefficient, quality and quantity. Quantity-wise, we need at least 8 hours of sleep. Quality-wise, and this is where I'm a big fan of the Garmin platform. The Garmin watch will actually tell you how much time you spend in various phases of sleep. If you've studied sleep at all, usually you'll hear someone say REM 1, REM just stands for rapid eye movement. REM 1, that rejuvenates the brain. REM 2 is transitional sleep, nothing good happens there. REM 3 is what rejuvenates you at a hormonal level, key word. So what the watch does is it shows you how much time, they refer to it as deep sleep, which is going to be that zone 3, that REM 3. When you're in REM 3, your body is rejuvenating itself at a hormonal level. So when we're looking at quantity, 8 hours, when we look at quality, I need at least 2 hours of deep sleep, but you need it to be ratioed against how much time are you awake. You can show me that you laid down for 9 hours, but if you stared at the ceiling fan for 7 of that, the quantity was there, but the quality wasn't.
Yeah.
So what we want to look at is 8 hours, 2 hours of deep sleep, minimal to no awake time. You get up to use the restroom, of course. Hopefully you can go right back to sleep. And then this may be beyond the scope of some people, but we also want to look at how many sleep cycles you get per night. The Garmin watch will actually show you a complete sleep cycle, and what we were looking for is at least 3 to 5 of those a night. So we see a combination of a bunch of disarray. We have people that'll maybe not get enough. We fix that. Then they get enough, but then the quality isn't there. Then when they get a little bit of the deep sleep, but they don't get enough of the sleep cycles, it's still an incomplete sleep pattern. Now for the listeners, they may go, golly, this is overcomplicated. The challenge that we run into is, if you think about the human body, the cell is the foundation of life. Cells make up tissue. Tissue makes up an organ. A series of organs makes up a system. Here we sit. Mm-hmm. Why do we wait until the system is diseased? You get a title, chronic fatigue, Epstein-Barr, Addison's disease, all fatigue-related diseases. We go, oh, now we got to address it.
Yeah.
I'm not going to say it's too late.
That's reactive.
But it's pretty late.
Instead of proactive.
Because if you think about what is a doctor going to tell you when you have chronic fatigue?
Yeah.
What do you need to do?
Rest.
That's it.
Yeah.
So why are we talking about it when it's a disease instead of getting ahead of it?
And the sleep thing, because I wore the Garmin for a little while working with you, and it was really neat to be able to see how much time I was in the different REM cycles, how many cycles I had, which I never got enough.
Yep.
And I started really going, well, how, I would wake up maybe 4 or 5 in the morning, my back's a little achy, or just,
Sure.
something that was waking me up and not letting me get back into the good sleep cycles. And it was like, if I stretched before bed, maybe some deep breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, and as we'll talk about, like sex.
Absolutely.
Before going to bed.
Yep.
Those things helped me to sleep better and really improve that. But some nights you get into bed and you're just like, I'm exhausted. I'm just going to go to sleep. And it ends up hurting you when you don't take those few extra steps. So anyway, we can talk more about that. Tell me about, you and I've had this discussion before, that food is the key to good sleep and recovery. Explain that.
Yeah, this is something that people take out of context very, very quickly. And that is, I want our listeners to think about hierarchy of needs. So you're telling yourself that you're determined that you're going to lose this unwanted body fat. And you're holding yourself accountable. I'm not going to fail this time. I'm not going to give up no matter what. So you put yourself to bed hungry. Now all of a sudden you're laying there and your body will not go to sleep. Well, that's the easiest illustration I could give you of hierarchy of needs. I always say, take a 2-year-old, take an 18-month, take a 6-month-old child, bathe it, wrap it up, put him to bed, and what happens? If you don't feed that child's not going to sleep through the night. And I always joke, when did the rules change? Now, there may be some people that are following us or watching this maybe for the first time, and there's all kinds of books out there now. Go to bed hungry, don't eat after a certain time, as your hormones change and all that. Textbook-wise, you're 100% correct. The biggest challenge you have to think about, though, is hierarchy of needs. So when we're looking at the hierarchy of needs, you're laying down wanting to go to sleep, but your body is hungry. Hunger is always going to supersede the desire to sleep. So what we want to look at, and this is where I get really, really frustrated with these so-called pundits and even some really smart people out there, is you're saying to me that you want the body to go to sleep. You're telling it that it can't eat after a certain period of time. What you really need to think about is you are driving up stress levels that are going to keep you awake. And we're going to talk a little bit about stress and cortisol and why that ends up becoming the reason why you're actually getting fat, not because of just the junk food you're eating. We clean that up. We have to start looking at managing stress. And as we look at managing stress, now we can start looking at the health benefits that comes with recovery. And that's what's going to be the big key right here is when we start talking about hierarchy of needs needs to be understood. Hierarchy of needs to be respected, and then watch what happens to our sleep.
So, Coach, you and I have had this conversation about the funnel concept before.
Yeah.
Explain that to folks who may not have heard that before in terms of rest and recovery.
When we're looking at rest and recovery, think about the funnel as what do you want of the bottom of the funnel? You know, we're talking about getting quality sleep. So everybody says, yeah, I want to sleep. I want to wake up feeling rested. I want to wake up without an alarm. I want to feel strong in the gym. I want to get through the day with my children, have a good day at work. That's a desirable outcome. Well, how are we going to get there? I always like to use the analogy of a funnel because what are you putting in the top of the funnel? Think about the funnel as your body's, we could call it the adrenal system. It's your ability to cope with stress. And what comes out the bottom of the funnel? When we're looking at rest and recovery, the two hormones that we're really chasing is going to be human growth hormone, HGH, and testosterone. HGH makes us naturally leaner, but it is a key hormone for recovery. So for those that are exercising, great, you're exercising. What hormone is going to help you recover? HGH, human growth hormone. Testosterone, besides all the sex hormones and all the things that go with it, testosterone plays a huge role in red blood cell count. So for our listeners that are struggling on energy, it could be you have low testosterone numbers and everyone goes, oh, it's because you're 45. Possibly, but if you're exercising and you're eating correctly, you shouldn't really be having a problem with low testosterone numbers. So what I want the listener to think about is when we look at that funnel, what do we need to put in the top of the funnel to get the desirable hormones out the bottom? And that's where we get into the subject of high quality fat. We're so fat phobic. We think fat makes us fat. Fat doesn't. Now, of course, saturated fat, fried foods, garbage, we're back to that QQ. We're making an assumption here that the quality of your food is already there, just like we're looking at sleep. If the quality of your food is good, fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, lean protein sources, we assume that that's getting put into the top of the funnel. Well, now the adrenal system can do its job, and we're going to talk about that when we get into stress and weight gain and stuff. But for the sake of rest and recovery, how do you expect the body to go, I can relax now? Well, you've got to satisfy appetite. That's why I like to always use the funnel. We all know what we want on the desirable outcome. We don't think about what we have to put in front in the top of the funnel to get what we want. High quality fat, MCT, is an acronym for medium chain triglycerides. Essentially, it's good fat. Extra virgin olive oil, raw nuts, raw coconut, chia seeds, all of those good things. If those are coming in, now we can start looking at satisfying appetite. There's only two macronutrients that satisfies appetite, and that's protein and fat. Carbohydrates do not satisfy appetite. That's why you can eat a Jethro-sized bowl of cereal and an hour later you're hungry. You eat 4 eggs, you can go all day and you feel full. Why? Because there's protein. So when we go back to the analogy of a child, once a child nurses or is bottle fed, there's protein and fat in that. You put the child usually will fall asleep while they're eating. They're clean, they're nestled, they're warm. You put them to bed, they sleep for a long period of time. That's why I always tease, when did the rule change for us as adults? And this is one of the biggest plagues that we have as an adult. First of all, it's oversold. We both agree to that. But as we rush into adulthood, what do? We don't eat much. We don't sleep much. We have a lot of stress in our lives, personally, professionally. And then we wonder, why am I gaining all this weight? I'm going to the gym. So what do? We go to the gym. We don't lose the weight. So what do? Train harder. We eat less. We drive the stress up. Then we try to lay down because we're going to be dedicated. We're going to lose that unwanted body fat. You don't eat. You try to go to bed. The body doesn't release the growth hormone, which makes you leaner. You see how this spiral goes the wrong way?
Yeah, it's a slippery slope when you start doing those wrong things, even though you've maybe been taught that, oh, this is how you do it, you're sliding off the wrong end of the slope.
That's right. And then we get, like you said earlier, this mindset of no pain, no gain, sleep is what you do when you die, et cetera, et cetera. When if you just, and that's why I really appreciate the listeners listening. I want to break the misinformation that's out there. Because yes, you can go into a textbook environment and say, look, if I do intermittent fasting and it's going to cause the body to start burning, you're exactly right. But that's because we've been designed in a way that allows us to adapt to adversity. There's a big difference between being in a mode of barely surviving versus putting your body into a state where it starts to thrive because you give it exactly what it needs. The right amount of a nutrient, the right amount of sleep, you just go down the whole list of check boxes. What do you get at the end of the day? A satisfied body that's capable of handling life's stress. It adapts positively, and your incremental improvement goes up. Health goes up, wellness goes up, performance goes up. But it's not by depriving it of a food group, depriving it of sleep, because I've got so much work to do. Mm-hmm. The body, again, I go back to the mechanical world. You overstress a system, the motor may be brand new, but if you overstress the system, run the oil low, save a little weight.
Yeah.
Run the motor hot because you don't want to put fluid in it.
Yeah.
Our human body is the same way. Radiator, hydration, good quality fat, oil in the engine casings. You grenade the engine casings, you can rebuild it. You grenade your adrenals, I can't rebuild it with a reach in and a replace.
Sure.
I've got to rebuild it, and we need to do that on a daily basis.
How does rest and recovery improve physical and mental strength? I feel like kind of tying into what you're saying, even if you're not an athlete, you're just a day-to-day guy who wants to be a little healthier.
Sure.
Which is sort of where I've fallen into, as a former professional athlete. Now I'm managing multiple jobs, and I still have to have a certain level of fitness, so I'm trying to maintain that. But I find that when I do the things you're talking about, I try to eat better, eat the things that we need to eat, get those good 8 hours of sleep at night, I'm more productive. Even if I take more time, okay, I'm cutting out 8 hours to sleep, even if I got to get up at 9. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I'd be up till 1 a.m, but you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Make it a priority. Then even if I have fewer hours to work and be productive during the day, I'm more productive because I'm making time for those other things. Exercise, proper nutrition, proper sleep.
Yep.
So I'm just saying that to kind of lead into how rest and recovery improves both physical and mental strength. Because for me, that's what I see.
Yeah, I go back to the child. If you have a 2-year-old and you don't feed him for 5 hours and he hasn't taken a nap and you decide to go to Disney World, you've had a Tasmanian devil on your hands.
Yes.
And it's not because your child has an alter ego. Low blood sugar and sleep deprivation brings out the worst in us. That's where we start relying on stimulants like caffeine. I'll just kind of jack my metabolism up. It'll get me back into my sweet spot. Well, if we go back to the motor example, it's like you riding, let's say we're using a motorcycle or even an automobile with a stick shift. You're cruising down the interstate at 60 miles an hour and you decide to downshift at 2 gears. You go from 6th to 4th. What's that RPM going to do? Mm. So you took the caffeine. All you did was just jack up the rev limiter, but you feel like you're in your sweet spot. Well, what's that doing to the strain of the system? And we do that day in and day out, day in and day out. And then we start to compound that with less and less sleep, less and less food, more and more stress, and the system's in there just fighting for everything it's worth to try to keep moving forward. That's what makes us so dangerous as human beings. If I'm running a car and that gas gauge goes to E and I just keep driving it, eventually I'm on the side of the road. We go to E and the body starts to adapt. That's what makes us so dangerous. If we had such an absolute where if we got to a certain calorie and we all right, we're literally on empty and we literally collapsed, we wouldn't let it. I hate to, especially for the listeners that have somebody that is a diabetic, but you've been around somebody who's insulin dependent. Mm-hmm. It's not a game.
I've been to calls 2, 3 in the morning, and these people are completely unconscious, unresponsive, sweaty, literally minutes away from dying.
Well, and that's the hard part is we take for granted that our system constantly is adapting. It's doing so much more to keep us alive at even some of the bad decisions that we make, smoking, excessive alcohol. The body keeps trying to fight all these carcinogens that we bring in. Well, if you've got somebody in your family that is a diabetic and you realize, okay, there's a system in the body, the pancreas does not produce the way it's supposed to. If we had that kind of absolute when it came to nutrition, because at the 10,000 foot view, we can only handle so much stress. Mm-hmm. And then you get into the situation where I'm determined I'm going to lose that weight. So then we hire Meathead Mark, you go to the gym, he smashes you. What is that? More stress. Mm-hmm. Well, wait, he tells you, you got to cut your calories. What is that? More stress. While you're at the gym sweating profusely, what is that? More loss of water, more loss of electrolytes, more stress. And the system's in there just going, man, I've got to accommodate. I got to keep doing what has been asked of me. We're back to hierarchy of needs again. If the body thinks it's going to die of a heat stroke, it's going to put all other bodily functions aside. So now digestion doesn't matter because it's like, I need all the blood and the water to go to contracting of muscles, delivery of oxygen, and water to the skin for sweat. I don't want to die of a heat stroke. So now we've put another level of stress on the system. Then you're done working out and they're like, no calories. The idea here is I almost wish that the body was as absolute as a mechanical. And you'll hear me say this quite often. I think that as humans, we become dangerous to ourselves because there's not an absolute like we see in the mechanical world. If a motor runs out of gas, it's parked, it's stopped. Yeah. If it runs out of oil and it grenades the bottom end of a motor, it's done. The difficult part for us is it takes us years to rebuild what we tear up, where in a motor world, if it's a top end, you just tear it apart, put it in, we're back up and running. Even if it's a bottom end, a lot of work, maybe a little bit expensive, but you can do it in a relatively short period of time. Human body, not so much.
Yeah, it's incredible. As a paramedic, I'll see how effective that we are at robbing Peter to pay Paul.
Absolutely.
And I mean, all the way down to, you were talking about hypothermia or heat stroke. Your body will shunt all the blood to your core. I mean, it will do these fascinating things to keep you alive.
Yep.
At all costs.
That's right.
And which is great if you're in an accident, some type of traumatic
Certainly.
thing. But when you're just living an unhealthy lifestyle,
yep.
And your body will still figure out a way for years to keep you going, keep you alive. Doesn't mean you're healthy, but until something big happens, a catalyst for change, most folks don't even realize how much their body's compensating.
Well, and that's why we always say in the physiology world, if it's identifiable, it's avoidable. What frustrates me is when people say, hey, you've got dark circles under your eyes. Hey, you've got night sweats. Hey, you're craving simple sugars. They make an excuse for it. Where that's an external sign that the body needs rest. It needs high quality fat. If you look at the 4 big indicators of adrenal fatigue, craving simple sugars, tired and can't sleep, night sweats and low sex drive, there's a lame excuse for all of those. But yet that is just a very subtle way that our body is designed to say, hey, something's wrong. But again,
that's that blinking light on the dash. Right?
That's exactly right. It's that red light that says maintenance required, and we go immediately to the mechanic, and he goes in, does his diagnostics, and we fix it. Mm-hmm. Well, we get it, and we go, suck it up. Mm-hmm. You're not pushing hard enough. And that's what really disappoints me, because if you look at something like, obviously a very volatile one is something HIIT, high intensity interval training. So a lot of people say, well, if you do HIIT training, that produces a ton of testosterone. You're going to be hyper lean. Look at all these great, sexy men and women that are running around in these gyms, and you could be like them. In a textbook setting, sure. If you're getting fed adequate amount of calories, if you're being made to get, literally physically made to get 8 to 10 hours of sleep, stress is at an all-time low, absolutely submit that human being to that. I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody that's in that category. Even being an athlete at the Olympic Training Center, then one of the biggest things they always focus on is trying to reduce the external stress of life. You literally are waking up, you're eating, you're training, you're eating and napping, you're eating, getting a massage, and doing another workout, repeat tomorrow. How many of our listeners have that opportunity?
That's pretty rare. I would say nobody.
Less than 0.5%?
Yeah.
Because even your elite athletes...
Or less.
Think about your elite athletes.
Yeah.
They're performing on Saturday night, traveling on Sunday, trying to train 3 days a week, back on a plane, somewhere in between their obligations.
Just life itself is stressful.
Exactly.
Bills and wars going on and drama. we have so much external stress that
Yes.
we probably don't even really realize. If you
Yep.
just really step back and go, okay, what's stressing me out?
Yep.
Um,
And we
lot
put
to
it, and think about what we're talking about. We're talking about rest and recovery, and we've come full circle back to come up with an excuse, push through. You're not dedicated. You're not diligent. All these little, I call it the little negative bird on your shoulder that's chirping. We've got to kill it.
Yeah.
Can you imagine telling a high-end mechanic, we're just going to talk sweetly to the motorcycle?
Yeah.
Or think about, this is where one of my big frustrations come in, is you take something that's a textbook concept like we were talking about. If you overstress the system and you like, okay, this is going to produce the hormones, it's going to make you naturally leaner. In a textbook setting, absolutely it's correct. But for the average individual that's got to try to balance life and then wants to add fitness, and then fitness adds more stress, then the lack of calories because somebody's telling them that they got to cut calories. Calorie restriction only adds more stress. More stress drives up cortisol. We're going to do a separate show on just cortisol and what stress does to make us fatter. Literally, as a human being, stress makes us gain body fat. So what we're talking about in this discussion point about rest and recovery, what I find is interesting is we almost want to go against the principles of physiology. And because we say that it's a sexy subject, we're putting it in a book, we're putting it in a bag, a can, we're conceptually putting it into some new fad of fitness, we still can't underestimate or undermine rather what the principles of physiology are. And I think for a lot of our listeners, that's one of their biggest challenges. They're being told, oh, you can go against the law of physiology. No, you can't.
Yeah.
It's like telling a mechanic you're going to just go push against the law of mechanics.
Yeah.
We just, as we said earlier, it's just not as absolute.
So a big part of this when we talk about that funnel is nutrition. Explain for me the difference between macro and micronutrients. We hear this a lot, get your macros in or whatever. Explain that a little bit better for me in layman's terms.
Well, I want nutrition to be super easy, and that is, think about macronutrients. We've all heard it, a carb, a protein, and a fat. Those are essentially what's necessary for the body to sustain life. It needs to survive, it needs to grow and adapt, and it needs to be able to recover. Think about that in just kind of a continuum. It doesn't want to be attacked by a virus. It doesn't want to succumb to fatigue. It wants to adapt to stress, whether that stress is weightlifting, cardio, school, work, athletic, whatever it is. Macronutrients give you the building blocks to do that. When you think of micronutrients, think about micronutrients as the catalyst of energy. Because a macro, a carb, a protein, and a fat cannot interact with themselves without the presence of a micronutrient. So if you and I go on a camping trip and we're trying to light a fire, we don't go get a big log and a match and sit there and hold it and wonder why the log doesn't catch on fire. You get that kindling going, and that's your fruits and vegetables. That's how easy nutrition is. If you think about fruits and vegetables are the catalyst for energy to make carbs, protein, and fat. Now, yes, fruits and vegetables are carbohydrates. That's not what we're saying. Keep nutrition simple. When somebody tells me they're going to strip a food group out because it has sugar in it, that is the most foolish thing I've ever heard. Because if I can get the listeners to change their perspective, yes, you can tell me that a kiwi has sugar in it, but it also has a dose of vitamins that we really, really need. They're high in electrolytes and water. If you think about whenever we talk about a power salad, the more colorful, the more nutritious. If you go to the grocery store and you only buy what's in season, the nutrient value in that is going to be at its highest. You don't want to buy something that's not in season, has no nutrient value to it. It's colorful and it looks good, but there's no nutrients to it. Think about a banana. A banana that's green does not yield the nutrients as much as a banana that's, I hate to say it, that's spotty, soft. The nutrient value is going to be its highest right before it spoils. So, I mean, not to where it's disgusting, but a green banana is not going to be as good as a fully ripe one. So when we hear somebody say, well, we're not going to eat this item because it has sugar in it, stop.
Yeah, I do hear that.
All
fruits,
the time.
Oh, strawberries and banana, they have a lot of sugar. Don't eat those. And I'm thinking, well, yeah, but I've been sweating all. I need the electrolytes. I actually need that.
Right.
There's so much bad information out there. That's what makes
But see, here's the thing,
so
though.
tough.
If you take and isolate the concept and go, oh, you get a big insulin spike on this, you're 100% correct. But as a human being, if you go to the doctor and you get your blood work, what are they giving you a panel on? All those micronutrients that are sitting in your system. Vitamin B6, B12, iron, zinc, creatine, all of this, right? Where do you think those numbers come from? Food. So if you start stripping food groups out, you strip out B6, you strip out zinc, you strip out iron, and then we go back to what we said earlier. Now you have a cell, it's unhealthy. An unhealthy cell makes an unhealthy tissue, an unhealthy tissue makes an unhealthy organ, a series of unhealthy organs makes a disease system. And then when we get disease, we go, yay, we get to go to the doctor and we get to get all kinds of prescriptions and all this other crap because somebody said don't eat a banana because it has too much sugar in it.
Does this pertain also to like people with celiac disease and they pull out gluten?
Totally different. Because if you're, if you have celiac disease and you eat gluten, you're going to be miserable.
What about people who don't have celiac and they still cut out gluten?
That's exactly my point.
Okay.
So now you've stripped a nutrient out for no reason whatsoever, and then we go back to, if you're looking at a system and everything interacts with one another, and all of a sudden you take two of the pieces out, I go back to the mechanical side of the world. Can you imagine trying to create a synthetic oil, but you don't put the right nutrients, or excuse me, the right ingredients into it? And then you wonder why the viscosity of the oil doesn't do what it's supposed to do, but you took 3 of the 12 parts out to make the oil? That's what makes us so dangerous as a human is if you look at certain parts of the world where a nutrient is deficient, and all of a sudden you see, okay, there's this disease that's associated with the deficiency of that. And then here we sit in today's day and age where there's a plethora of food and we're saying, no, we're not going to eat that voluntarily. I for the life of me, do not understand it.
Yeah, I know.
But it's super sexy and sizzling when you can say, I'm going to tell you everything you can't do. And then people gravitate towards it like it's a novelty.
Well, I think that there's such sex sells, right?
Yes.
Every magazine, every web page you click on, every Instagram photo, it's rippling 6-pack abs and a butt that would, you could bounce a roll of quarters off of. Like mine. I mean, that's how mine looks, of course.
Of course.
So we have this standard that's, a lot of those photos are airbrushed. There are some people that really look like that, but man, that's their whole life, right? Or they're genetic lottery winners.
Well, that, or I hate to be a bearer of bad news, but if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And now you've got synthetic drugs that are getting factored into the equation. Yes. Now, and I will say this for the sake of our listeners, I'm not making that comment to be snide. We've been doing this for 37 years. I have had 300 people plus that have come in that went hard keto, went hard CrossFit, went hard insanity, P90X, went all these different things. And then they report to us with broken down system. This system's broken, this system's broken, this system's broken. And the sad part about it is a lot of times they'll come out and they'll say, look, I was juiced to the gills with synthetic HGH because it made me excessively lean. Because I got the look I was going for, but I got the look at the expense of fill in the blank, adrenals. The whole system's in disarray. So now what's the doctor trying to do? Undo all of the damage that was done. And we've even had athletes that have come in and the doctors are like, there's nothing we can do.
And I don't mean to diss the medical community, but I feel like, again, the almighty dollar rules everything. And a lot of times, again, this is my experience as a medic.
Yes.
I go in for somebody who's had this issue. The doctor prescribes this pill. That's created this issue. Then he prescribed this one. That money is forcing decisions that are not necessarily in the best interest of the patient. And I hate to say that. You think the doctor they took the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm. And I think that's a bunch of BS at times. Not every doctor.
No, of course not.
But an awful lot of them are selling out to these pharmaceutical companies and hurting their patients. It's my take from the floor.
I'll disagree with you politely. It's not your take on it. It's based on what you've seen, and you can't argue with the evidence when you know what led to the status of the person that you just saw. You're not saying anything that's disrespectful, because if you look at the end result and then you ask that person what they did and they said, here's all the scripts that we did, you're certainly right, 100% right.
Because the root of someone's disease, as we've talked about, is diet, nutrition, lifestyle, rest, recovery.
Not enough rest and recovery, because what's the only thing that offsets stress?
Rest and recovery.
That's it.
Food,
So continue. I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
I'm just saying, instead of the doctor going, okay, you need a lifestyle change. Let's get on a good diet. Let me explain to you how much sleep you need and why. Let me educate you.
Yes.
It's high blood pressure. Here's a pill. Take that.
Not what's the catalyst for that high blood pressure. The McDonald's, the smoking, the excessive drinking.
And I understand it's easier for them to write a prescription, but that's a Band-Aid over the problem. And it's only going to cascade into more problems.
Well, and you bring up something that I think the listeners need to really comprehend. If you put in 3 variables, 3 to the third power is 27 different combinations of what could go wrong. So when you're looking at health and wellness and you say to me, Rob, I don't have any energy, let's look at your food log. If it consists of fruits, vegetables, and lean protein, we have nutrition done. Because there's nothing that's good. Now, again, like you said, if you have celiac disease and you're pounding a bunch of grains, but I think Blowout Bob in the restroom is going to fix that pretty quick. If I go to the other extreme, exercise, I know what duration for what intensity and what frequency. I can now check the checkbox. I've got food dialed, I've got exercise dialed. Now we go and we look at the other stresses in life, what's going on professionally, what's going on personally, what's going on financially. Try to get all that within reason. Now we have a human being that the body goes,
Yeah.
Now we have a foundation for evaluation. Now give me your blood work. Because I don't have the influence of 13 pills. And again, just use simple exponential combinations. The more variables you add, the more confusion, the more lack of information you're going to have.
And to use your mechanical analogy, I feel like a lot of times you're working with nicer cars, more race cars. I get called out on the beat up old Volkswagen buses.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, this thing's not running right. What's going on? And you open the hood and you're like, whoa.
Yeah. Well, then we can come back to the idea of accountability and self-responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, if we all, and if you're a new listener and this is new for you, it's okay. It's not going to be easy when it's new. But the cool part is once it becomes habitual, it's one less thing you have to worry about. If you go to the grocery store and you only shop the perimeter of the store, you can't go wrong.
Yeah, and that's a big point you've made in the past is shopping the perimeter and how to shop. Take us through that a little bit more.
Well, it's like we said earlier. Nutrition is very easy. Fruits, vegetables, and lean protein. Shop the perimeter of the store and you found it. What's not in the perimeter of the store?
Stuff that goes in the middle is stuff that will last.
Processed garbage, right?
Yeah.
If it's in a box, a can, or a bag, it's processed. That's why when we were kids, we go to school for 9 hours. We come home as Tasmanian devils. Where'd we go to? We didn't run to the freezer and grab a steak and go grill it. We ran straight to the pantry where it was a bag, a box, or a can of something. What does our body want? Our liver specifically feeds our brain, and our liver's like, we're low on sugar. So we go to convenience. We're not talking about health now, we're talking about convenience. And that's where we get into self-accountability. If you're going out to the grocery store and you're only shopping in the perimeter and you don't have bags and boxes and cans, and you come home and there's just a bowl of fresh fruit, and then last night's high-quality dinner has been put into some Tupperware and all you got to do is heat it up in a microwave, you just fixed your nutritional problem. But it does take some responsibility of cooking it, packing it, and making it available.
Sure.
And again, we don't live in a glass house, but if we're going to get to the root of it, it's about accountability and responsibility with knowledge. This misinformation of starve yourself and deprive yourself and just go until you blow, it's what's put us in the epidemic that we're in right now.
Absolutely. So shop the perimeter of the store, look for those things you're talking about. Talk about prepping it and cooking it. What's your theories there?
Well, if it's not fried, it's good. It's that simple, whether you're doing stir fry, grilling it out, whatever it may be. If it's not in that nasty oil, it's not going to have those saturated fats, you're golden. The more seasons you put in there, they're good for you. They're strong and improves your immune system. If you're sauteing, stir frying, whatever, you can't go wrong with it.
And you're a big fan of extra virgin olive oil. What about, there's now like avocado oils and coconut oils, all those type of things.
Great point. What's the source of all those? They're real raw foods.
Real raw foods.
It's raw, real foods, and it's not synthetic.
Oil, right?
Yeah. We always say if you can't pronounce it, you can't digest it. So when you look at the bottle, that's why we're such big fans of ice cream. If you go with full fat, high quality ice cream, it's usually, take vanilla, it usually has 4 ingredients: whole milk, raw sugar, vanilla bean, and it's real food.
And love.
Lots of love.
That's the other ingredient.
That's a lot of love. But again, people are like, they want to villainize pizza. What's wrong with pizza? If you go to a nice Italian restaurant and all of their products are handmade and they're buying from the highest quality of meats and vegetables, I still haven't found out what's wrong with pizza.
Yeah, me either. I love pizza.
But think about it though. These things get villainized because it's like, oh, it has bread. Nothing wrong with bread if it's high quality bread. Yeah. If you go and you pick up
a Red Baron frozen pizza,
not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah. But you go to the bakery and you pick up a loaf of heavy pumpernickel bread. If it's heavy, it's low glycemic. pick up white bread and it goes through the roof, it's high glycemic and garbage.
Totino's pizza rolls. Yes or
Ooh,
no?
no, sir.
Damn it.
No, sir. Unfortunately not.
All right. Talk about how to consume. You've mentioned to me before chewing slowly.
People don't realize, and Michaela will pick on me on that. I cannot go to public restaurants and watch people eat. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen because it's shovel, chew, gulp. Next shovel comes right in behind it. As a physiologist, all I can picture are these clumps of food sitting down in the stomach, and now all this gastric juice has to break that down. And then people run out and they get Pepto-Bismol, Tums, and acids because they've got heartburn. No, you just didn't even chew your food. I mean, there's animals in the wild that will chew their food better than that. And the reason why I go there is because the absorption of vitamins and minerals starts in the mouth. So if you really want to get more absorption of your food, do yourself a favor. Now, I don't want it to turn to baby food mush in your mouth and then you want to regurgitate it. But
Just don't be swallowing chunks that you're going to choke on.
literally, when you put the food, put your fork down. Put your utensil down. You'd be surprised what that will do. It changes the entire landscape of eating.
It's really interesting. My grandfather, who I'm hoping I inherited some of his genes, lived into his 90s, late 90s.
Okay.
And his thing was he would chew his food 100 times.
Yeah.
And I used to kind of go, wow, that's weird, but
Yeah.
maybe
He's
there's
ahead of
something
his
to
time.
it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's just think about where you absorb your food. And the less stress you can put in the system to break that down, the easier it is for the GI tract and the absorption of vitamins and minerals.
Interesting. I imagine that this question, that the answer varies quite a bit person to person, but how many calories do we consume daily? Should we?
As a general rule of thumb, take your body weight, add a 0 to the end of it. That's always a good starting point.
Okay.
So if you weigh $150, 1,500 calories is going to put you in the ballpark. I can't take credit for that formula. I got that from the Olympic Training Center. And what's interesting is with the advent of these heart rate monitors, it's amazing how like almost Johnny on the spot those numbers are. They would take it a step further. They would say if you're going to work out once a day, you would take your body weight, add a 0, and then double it.
Oh, wow.
And it's amazing if you look at what guys are doing now. It doesn't matter what sport it is. It's amazing the accuracy of that number. When that number was given to us, we didn't even train with heart rate monitors then.
Huh.
So the idea that it's come full circle, but it's always just a general rule of thumb for everybody. Take your body weight and add a 0. If you're exercising, add another half of that. More importantly, get a heart rate monitor and see what your true expenditure is, because it'll partition it off on what you're burning athletically, and it'll partition off what you need, what we call basal metabolic needs, what you need to survive. So
that's training. What about during training? There's bars and gels and goos and drinks.
I'm glad you bring it up because this is a subject that really creates a lot of confusion for people when we're looking, because we're still under the subject of rest and recovery. What we need people to understand is when they don't get enough calories during exercise, or they try to digest too many, it creates too much stress. That's the most important thing for people to remember is your body. Well, here's the number: your body cannot digest more than 300 calories an hour. So
under exercise.
Under exercise. Okay. So the challenge that you run into is it goes back to that hierarchy of needs. The body's trying not to die of a heat stroke. Well, it's starting to run out of energy. You've only got about 60 to 80 minutes worth of stored energy in your body. You store energy in the way of glycogen, stored sugar. Your liver feeds your brain. So when you're doing something of high process speed, your brain is just draining that sugar quicker and quicker the faster you go. Whenever we're doing motorsports, when you're talking a car that's going 100 miles an hour and it's 3 inches off the wall, that low blood sugar is the difference between kissing that wall or going consistently. Add G-forces and all that goes with it. The faster the processing speed of the brain, the quicker that gas tank empties. Well, when are you going to start to replenish it? Your body can only digest 300 calories per hour. But yet we have some athletes that are burning 1,000 calories an hour.
Yeah.
And we'll do another conversation around nutrition and performance. But this is where you've got to train your body to be more efficient at burning stored body fat. Because as you bring the intensity up, you're burning more and more sugar and less fat. Well, if you're looking at your heart rate and your processing speed is super quick, you've got to train yourself very, very sport specific. Very sport specific.
That's interesting to me because when I was racing professionally, motocross, which is very high processing speed,
Absolutely.
You're doing a million things at once. But I would wake up in the mornings and nervous, for the event, race day, and it was tough for me to eat. I mean, I would choke down a couple eggs, like,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
tough to keep them down. I could do fruit, bananas, maybe a little thing of oatmeal, but it's difficult race day to even eat anything. And then, like, you know, we talked about before, I'm always fascinated by the physiology side of it, where when you eat, your body pushes all that blood to the core so that it can, you know, uses it to digest food.
Yep.
But when you're active, now it shunts it all, pushes it all out to the periphery to feed your muscles, you know, for whatever you're doing. So
Well,
then there's no blood here, so you're not digesting
and that's
anything.
why you end up with
That's where
that
the
GI
300 hours.
distress. And then you get into food complexity, because like we do a lot of work with triathletes. So if we're at Ironman Hawaii, the road from the swim to the turnaround point on the bike, when we get the first 2 hours, you know, hour and a half on the bike, we're using more complex foods. But once we turn around at Hawi and we come back, we're liquid only until we cross the finish line. And that includes the second half of the bike and the entire marathon. Because we always say the race begins at Hawi. So on the way back, we start to bring the intensity up. You've got to bring food complexity down.
Simple
That's why you
sugars.
go to more of a liquid diet from that point on.
And I've always found that something, and I don't mean that this isn't like an infomercial for your products, but the energy fuel, the way you guys have created different products based on what you're doing. There's one for 1 hour or less and high intensity,
Yep.
a medium intensity, and then a longer duration, 3 hours plus.
Yep.
And it's just like you talked about, broken down, a little bit more caffeine in the short intensity one, but more protein in the 3 hour plus.
That's right.
That makes so much sense to me, and it's like why are more companies not doing that?
Well, it goes
I
back.
suppose cost.
It goes back to
prohibitive.
cost.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and this is no disrespect to the companies that are out there, the only reason why I even started a drink business was because there was nothing else out there. And what I find happening is people will develop a product and it's a one shoe fits all. So we have a speed and agility division, which is very short and explosive and requires a lot of mental focus. So the carbohydrate complexity is a little bit easier to digest, to turn it quicker, and the caffeine's for mental focus. We go to 1 to 3 hours, the intensity is going to be a little bit lower because the duration is going up. So the complexity of the carbohydrates a little bit more, not too much. But then we also, both in the 1 hour and the 1 to 3, we put what's called a polyalpha lactate. It's a lactic acid buffer. It's a byproduct of just high intensity. See the science behind it?
Yep.
You got to know where your source of calorie is coming from and then try to offset it, the negative byproduct, which is lactic acid. You put those together in a drink, now the athlete gets more out of it. The energy fuel boost, plus is for 3 hours and above. What did we say earlier? There's only 2 macronutrients that satisfies appetite, protein and fat. So we put a little bit of protein in it so you don't get that hollowed out feeling. And because there's an assumption that when you go 3+ hours, heart rate's going to come down. You shouldn't be at the same heart rate at 3 hours that you are for 40 minutes.
Yeah.
If you are, that's part of your problem. But because the complexity, the heart rate comes down, we can bring the complexity up, and then we add the protein to satisfy hunger. So that way you don't want to bite your arm after 3 hours.
Yeah.
So there's a science behind it. And I say it all the time, make sure that the product you're using fits the way you're trying to use the product. Because people are getting so frustrated. They're like, why do I have all this gastrointestinal issues? Because the complexity is too complex for the intensity that you're doing.
Yeah.
They go, that makes all the sense in the world. What should I get? And at the time, there was nothing I could offer to them. So instead of complaining about it, we created it.
Yeah, it's amazing. So tell me about sick stomach, and while you're exercising, training, whatever, what causes an upset stomach?
Well, remember what we're talking about today. We're talking about rest and recovery. And the only way you can offset stress is with adequate rest and recovery. When you get into something like exercise, the challenge you run into is that hierarchy of needs again. The body doesn't want to die of a heat stroke, nor does it want to freeze. So if the homeostasis of the temperature of the body is in its sweet spot, then it'll talk to you about nutrition. It'll talk about the need that, you're on your way to Hawi on a bike and you're going 26 miles an hour, but I don't want to die of a heat stroke. So if I'm air temperature, if I'm able to maintain my core temperature, then come back and talk to me about nutrition. If you get that upside down and you put that food in your stomach and the digestion system gets shut down, it begins to ferment. Then you end up with gas and vomiting and all that goes with diarrhea. The body's pretty amazing because if it doesn't want something in the system, it gets rid of it.
Yeah.
Whether that's too much alcohol, whether it's food or whatever, it's coming out one end or going out the other. And it's never a fun subject, But people will put up with it because they're like, I've got to eat. You got to adjust the food complexity to the intensity, which is we measure off a heart rate.
Interesting stuff. I want to touch on hydration because obviously any type of performance, any type of exercising, that's key.
Sure.
How much are we trying to consume per day? Is there a formula you have for that?
Yeah. The easiest formula for proper hydration is take your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2, and that's how many ounces you want. So if I'm 150 pounds, 75 ounces spread out over an 8 to 10 hour day.
Okay.
No more. So this
And is it bad if you consume too much early and then less later, or vice versa?
not so much. I mean,
a lot of times I'm trying to get there early
in the morning. Well, you could, if you overhydrate, you dilute the electrolytes in your bloodstream.
Yeah.
And you could put yourself
cramping
into and then if you dilute those electrolytes, byproduct is going to be cramping, and if you go real overboard, you could get into a state of hyponatremia, which could kill you. So we don't want to go there. It's better to say, all right, if I need to get 80 ounces in a day, do 10 ounces over 8 hours. Do 8 ounces over 10 hours. The idea is you got to think about hydration as two sides of the coin. What do you need to sustain life, and what are you losing in the form of sweat? Completely different calculation.
Yeah.
But those two added up is whether or not you're properly hydrated.
And is there a way to calculate for sweat loss? I sweat a lot. So some days I don't work out, or it's an easy day.
Yeah.
I obviously don't need as much water, but how do I if I sweat and I'm drenched when I'm done?
Sure.
Like I worked out this morning and I looked like someone sprayed me down with a hose.
Yeah.
How do I know how much I lost? I know you have a weight calculation for that.
It's very simple. Take your weight before you start working out. Take your weight afterwards. And then also add how much fluid. People forget about that. If I step on the scale at 160 in the morning and I go work out and I come back and it's 155, I didn't lose 5 pounds. I lost 5 pounds on the scale plus the 32 ounces that I drank. That's 2 extra pounds. But the net loss is 7, not 5. And then you divide your beginning body weight by that to get your percentage. Now we have a calculator. Anybody that's listening can just contact Jennifer. It's contact@coachrobb.com. Happy to send the calculator out. It's just an Excel spreadsheet. But if you plug in those 3 numbers, it'll tell you what your percentage of loss is. As a general rule of thumb, you don't want to, this is a kind of you don't want to lose more than 2%. You're dehydrated. But if you don't lose at least 1%, you're overhydrated. You don't want to finish at the same weight you started.
Okay.
Because you're losing sweat, you're losing water through sweat, respiration, urination, bodily functions. There's no reason why you should have gained weight.
Interesting.
So keep that in mind. The reason why I say gained weight is if I took in 16 ounces, I'm still the same weight. I overdrank.
What about during exercise?
In regards to
Drinking, hydration.
Yeah.
How much should you be drinking?
That's the $1 million question. If you do your workout and you weigh yourself, and now this gets a little bit technical maybe for the new listeners, that's why we're such big fans of the heart rate monitor. What we do is we look at your weight at the beginning and the end, how much you consume during. Now, take a deep breath. We look at average and max heart rate. We look at average temperature, and then we look at the duration of the activity to say, okay, for 1 hour, you lost 8 pounds, consuming 32 ounces. You need to bump, I'm just using loose numbers, but you got to adjust based on intensity, duration, and the humidity.
So you guys do have a specific formula for that.
But think about our listeners, though. How frustrated are they when one day they race really, really well, one day they exercise really, really well, the next day they cramp up, they can't sleep well, we're back to recovery. They don't realize that screwing themselves with overhydrating or underhydrating, overeating, undereating, drives up stress, and then it eliminates the ability to recover, which is the only time you can get healthier. See how this becomes a vicious cycle?
Yeah, and hydration is so key into the way your body functions. As a medic, that's something we learn.
Unbelievable.
You're all electrical impulses, and it obviously travels through electrolytes in your fluids and things like that. And so, if you're dehydrated, nothing is firing right.
Well, you bring up something. Let's take one of our general fitness listeners. If you're dehydrated, your core body temperature is going to be up. That workout's going to be harder than it needs to be. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum. A high-end athlete that's dehydrated, the muscles don't slide and glide. They lose top-end speed. They lose endurance. They lose lactate tolerance.
Yeah, it's bad all the way around.
But very simple to offset if you know what your basal metabolic needs are for fluid, and then knowing what your sweat rate is. It's pretty easy to predict success.
See, I always said I never needed algebra, but maybe I do.
Yeah.
Maybe
Well,
I do. Or I just go to CoachRobb.com.
That's right. Fortunately, we have a full-time programmer that I can come up with the ideas, and then I let him do the algorithms for it.
There you go.
That's the only way.
So this is a question that I ask myself all the time, and I don't really know the answer to. When should I be drinking just water versus a recovery drink?
Yeah.
I love the energy fuel. To me, it tastes. I prefer drinking something with taste.
Yep.
So if I'm just cruising around the house working or whatever, I'll just do a little bit of lemon in water. That's kind of my go-to. Yep. But if I am exercising, I'll have like a boost before maybe, and then afterwards, do I want to have something else, or do I just go straight to like a recovery protein drink? I'm always kind of going, well, I sweat a lot. Do I need another, drink that's got some electrolytes in it? Well, I'm kind of always confused about when I should be drinking what.
Your question has like 4 different dynamics to it, because you mentioned earlier you're a profuse sweater.
Yeah.
So we know your propensity to become electrolyte deficient is going to be quite high. Electrolytes are necessary for muscle contraction, and you lose it in the form of sweat. So it's a double whammy when you're exercising. The only way that we could really figure out, and depending on when people are listening to this, we're working on a research project right now with a patch that would actually tell you what electrolytes you're deficient in, which can help us change the profile to help offset that. So that's coming. In the meantime, always use your weight before and after, and then how did you perform? If you were strong from start to finish, because it goes back to, like you said, those electrolytes play a significant role in communication, muscle contraction. If you're finishing the workout strong, then you know that your electrolyte balances are good. We know you're properly hydrated because you're not overheating. That's good. When you talk about your workout's an hour long, you really don't need any kind of, I own my own sports drink business, and I'm here to tell you that you don't even need to take an energy fuel for the first hour.
Oh, is that right?
Because if you're eating the fruits and the vegetables, what are they high in?
Yeah, you're getting all those electrolytes.
They're high in water. So this is where it's a self-correcting mechanism. When you snack and you eat fruits and vegetables consistently, your body's constantly topped off. Well, you've got about 60 to 80 minutes worth of energy and the right mixture of electrolytes and water. You really don't even need to do anything. Now, there's obviously a fine line there. If you're a profuse sweater, you might be good for 43 minutes. Somebody else might be good for 58 minutes. That's where it becomes a little bit more individualized. Test it, document it, challenge it, adjust it. But eventually you get the framework. I don't want to be overwhelming to the listeners, but if I know the temperature and I know the duration and I know your average intensity, I can reverse engineer what your hydration needs are. But it just takes a little bit of documentation.
Well, even that helps me, just knowing that I've got an hour and I don't really, I like the boost because it gives me a little caffeine. I just feel like a little bit perked up and ready. But now, I'm comfortable, unless I'm doing a long day, which then I'll use the 3 hour plus, throw it in a OGO hydration pack, and I'm sipping on it all day.
But on the end of that, when you're done, you have what's called a glycogen synthase enzyme. And that enzyme allows your body to suck depleted glycogen back into sugar, back into the muscles. So that's why we came up with recovery fuel, because you've got about a 15 to 20 minute window, because you mentioned post-exercise. Liquid calories are always best. They're going to absorb much easier.
When we talk about being hydrated, fruits and vegetables contain a lot of water.
Yes.
Tell me how that relates to hydration.
It goes back like we were saying earlier. How do I know if I'm properly hydrated? Well, if you're snacking on fruits and vegetables, it's like an insurance program. And it's not like if you ate too many fruits and vegetables, it's going to kill you. You'll just urinate it out. If you get an excessive amount of electrolytes, your body will just pass it as urine. If you think about what we're talking about in today's show, the whole idea is about rest and recovery. Well, if the body isn't getting what it needs, it won't be able to shut itself down and go, like we've said several times today, is the idea is we want that body to be satiated. Give it everything it needs to perform optimally. You and I have an extensive background in the motorsports world. It's amazing to me. Can you imagine taking one of these race machines and you just decide that out of 100 parts, you're just going to put one old one in? What does that do to the sequence of that entire
well, there's
motor?
your weak link.
No pun intended. But that's what disappoints me, is when somebody will take a subject out of context and then it just completely throws the system out of whack. And then the person gets frustrated because they're like, yeah, but fill in the blank. I'm only doing HIIT training. I'm only eating 1,000 calories, whatever it may be. But the domino effect, I always want people to think about dominoes are falling forward towards success. instead of following backwards until we become diseased and then we finally react. You said it earlier. I refuse to work in a world of reaction. I always want to work in a world of being proactive. But for the sake of the listeners, I want people to understand how to identify it, understand what's actually going on, and more importantly, how to fix it.
Yeah.
But maybe not even fix it, preferably stay ahead of it. But for some of our listeners, they may be in a mode that they got to fix something, unfortunately.
Yeah, you get yourself so far behind the eight ball, you got to correct some things first. We talked a lot about cooking food and snacking and getting the right nutrients, what's going in the funnel. You have some cookbooks, snack books, and things like that are out. We have a couple here that we bought, and the smoothies, kind of my favorite, more of a summertime thing, but
Yeah.
I'm not as hungry when it's hot, so those are a great way for me to just get some good calories in and good foods. How many of those do you have on Amazon? Where can people find those?
Right now, we've got a cookbook, we've got a snack book. Actually, I think we have 2 or 3 versions of the cookbook itself. Every time we travel, my wife, Michaela, she's a gourmet chef. She likes to collect those, and we like to give credit for the people that we've learned from them. But like you said, with the smoothies, the snack books, the cookbooks, for the listeners, what I really want them to understand is what you just said. You get into the heat, you got to remember, when someone has a problem with a suppressed appetite, heat, humidity, stress, all of those suppress appetite. So you're talking about in the summer, it's 100 degrees outside, you should eat, but then the idea of eating makes you nauseated.
Especially something hot. I'm not eating a hot plate.
It's a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
And that was really the genesis behind it. It was like, all right, people would ask us, hey, what should I eat? When I go to the grocery store, what should I purchase? That was the purpose for those books. And I would encourage people to take a look at them. They're on Amazon. You can find them all there. They're on the Coach Robb store as well. But the thing that I want you to keep in mind is try them all. Because I get this all the time. Someone will call up and they'll say, Rob, Brussels sprouts comes to mind. I was told Brussels sprouts going to give me all kinds of energy. Well, I eat them and they make me sick to my stomach. Then don't eat them.
Yeah.
Because I don't ever want to come across as you just got to suck it up. And you got to have some, life's too short to begin with, in my opinion. The idea is, and here's the other side of the coin. I've had people that said, hey, I read it in a magazine. I read it in a book and it said this was good for me. I ate it and it made me fall asleep. Well, you're having a sensitivity to that food. Oh, no. The book says it's high in vitamins, high in this. Doesn't matter. Your body showed a negative reaction. When we look at nutrition, always think about mental clarity, think about energy. If you can't finish a workout, 30-minute walk, 3-hour bike ride, if you can't finish that strong, you're not getting enough quantity and or quality of what's necessary. Then when you do eat something, if you find yourself had the old head nod and you're having a negative reaction, I don't care what the textbook says. It's not for you.
Yeah.
So that's where we create customized nutrition and hydration. We start with the framework and then we run it through the filter of real world.
And I'm a big fan of blood panels that will show allergies to food.
Absolutely.
I realized after almost 40 years of living that I was allergic to milk, casein protein, and a handful of other things. And not drastically where I'm going into an anaphylactic reaction, but just some inflammation where they're like, yeah, I probably shouldn't have that.
Right.
And, I found a replacement for it,
Yeah.
Whatever, oat milk or some other type of thing. But I think that's another good tool people can use for food allergies.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I might eat something and then I have a day where I'm just dragging ass. And it might not have been the food, it was I didn't get to sleep or I'm dehydrated. I don't know what it is. So
all the parts coming together.
Yeah, that blood panel and that allergy panel to me was a nice way of going, okay, it's taking my emotions and how I feel out of the equation. And there it is, very simply in black and white.
Well, we'll do another show on nutrition, but to your point, this is where we have to kind of look a little bit below. I get a little annoyed with certain television shows that'll go out and they'll go after an industry. They'll go after the beef council. They'll go after the boat, and they'll say, oh, it's bad for you. Easy. Let's kind of look below the surface a little bit. It's the bovine hormones that are all jacked up with steroids and all this other garbage that's not good for you. It may or may not be the dairy that you had the reaction to. It might be something that they're being fed. In your case, you did a lot of testing, you cross-evaluated a lot of it, then you came up with your own decisions. But some of those allergy tests are not really testing the product. What you're seeing is the sensitivities. We have what's called a 2-week food challenge where we have people, we show them ways to remove their dependency on simple sugars and white starches. And once you get that out of their system over 2 weeks, then we introduce one new item to see, Do you have a negative reaction? If you do, pull it back out because you only introduced one new one. And you do that until you reestablish. We had a lady that reintroduced coffee back in, and she had an amazing negative reaction to it. I mean, just smoked her, leveled her out.
Wow.
And she's thinking it was the coffee. Well, we did some due diligence and found out it was the artificial sweetener in her creamer that was knocking her out. But you see how it's easy to take and make coffee the culprit, but it was the ancillary around it. So I just want the listeners to keep that in mind, whether it's an allergy test or doing your own test, make sure you're looking at all the variables. Don't just say this product doesn't work if that product's, I'm thinking something like a dinner meal where you got sauces and all kinds of other stuff that can skew the results. Look at it a little bit differently than what people are really thinking about.
Well, that's great stuff. We don't want this to go too long. We're going to have a ton of topics coming up. So stay tuned for more Coach Robb podcasts. Thanks for the time.
Oh,
this
man,
was a lot
thank
of fun.
you.
I'm learning as we go too, so I love
It's always
that.
good. Thanks for stepping up to the new format, man. I really appreciate it, and thanks for your time.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan and a big believer in your stuff. So
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. More podcasts coming. Thanks for tuning in.